toi kuvaan? Näyttääkö se mulle? Good afternoon. Hello, Yasmin. I can see you. I hope I would love to see everybody else, but as you know, today we live in these strange worlds of virtual realities, but I'm so glad to warmly welcome you to join this webinar of the National Council of Women, Women's Organizations for Feminist Futures. I am truly happy that we are such a large number of participants, and especially I'm pleased that we have so many international participants also present with us. We are now here in Helsinki living in 4 p.m. But as you know, we have Dr. Yasmeen Hassan with us from New York, the Global Executive Director of Equality Now, an International Equality Prize winner of 2019. And then we have Mary Collins from Brussels. She's an expert in economic and social policies of the European Women's Lobby, also sitting from, I suspect, from Brussels at the moment. And then we have the pleasure to be joined with a comment speaker, Sirpa Pietikäinen, who is a member of the European Parliament, also president of the Marta organization today. Thank you for joining us so much. Myself, I'm leading you through the program in my capacity of President of the National Council of Women in Finland. It includes 65 member organizations with more than 400,000 members, mostly women, the large majority women. We are, I would argue, an active and fearless advocate of women's rights, gender equality, and girls' and women's human rights. We underline participation of all women and diversity, for instance, regarding disability, migrant background, or sexual orientation. We are all different together. Today, here in Finland, we feel we have stopped the backlash. At least we have halted it for a moment. We have, perhaps many of you know very well, a situation with the highest ever number of women parliamentarians, almost half, very close to. We almost have a government of the famous five. All the five party leaders, the coalition of 5 parties, all the party leaders in the government are women, and they are absolutely brilliant women. You know, not any women, I would argue. Finland, of course, has a rather glorious past in the promotion of women's rights. But in recent years, we have unfortunately taken steps backwards. Looking from the European Union and World Bank gender equality indexes, it can clearly be stated. To us, this shows strongly that gender equality cannot be taken for granted. We have to do it all over again. The National Council of Women has lobbied fiercely in order to promote various new reforms, such as to end violence against women, for instance, the sexual offense in criminal law, to change the whole chapter on criminal law, for instance, to include the absence of consent as a legal definition of rape. This is something that is generally debated all over. We hope that this will happen quite soon, that we get into the parliament, a proposition. We also want to increase the number of shelter homes and to double the funding of shelters. And we still have quite far to go. We also want to see a reform of family leaves, parental leaves, to increase the amount father share of this parental leaves. We want to change the law, but we also want to change how it is implemented in practice. We want to see fathers share half of the leaves. We also promote funding of the women's NGOs, and of course, not least, the women's rights advocates organizations funding is crucial to sustain. This year, to us all, it has been quite a different year from what we anticipated. But nevertheless, it is in a positive way, it's a very special year because we have celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action of Women's Rights. The National Council of Women in Finland have actually, together with more than 40 organizations, gathered a strong report on what's the status of these actions today in Finland. And lots needs to still to be done. But of course, cooperation helps us to promote concrete changes. And together with Equality Now and the European Women's Lobby, we share the same concerns and the same goals in order to advance women's rights, to end violence against women. We definitely stand together, and I want to say that we are united more than we perhaps believe, and we want to be on the front lines. So you could ask, what is needed yet? What is needed now further? We have not done perhaps enough to stop the backlash globally, perhaps not even in Europe, perhaps not even in my own country. But we have stopped it for a while here. But what we now need is to take a leap forward. We want to lead and we want to go forward in the whole, all gender equality policies. We need to identify key questions, key structures, and key policies, and key operators to recognize how we would work at different levels with various partner organizations. One of the most crucial areas with regard to cooperation is the cooperation with media. Or to work with media, perhaps rather. We feel and we experience here that our partnership with the Finnish media has functioned very well and has been quite successful. We feel that we have been able to push the media, at least the biggest media houses, the public, what is it in Finland, the public broadcasting company, of course, Yle, for instance, to absolutely start working on their gender equality agenda and to make it real. And it has been visible for us, I think, for us all. Another area of importance is, of course, advancing women's rights and activities, is, of course, work with everybody actively at the grassroots level. Terhi, I want to give the floor to you before we go to our panelists.
Dear all, please be warmly welcomed also from my side. It's a pleasure to meet you all, even online. Next year, 2021, the National Council of Women of Finland will celebrate its 110 years anniversary together with its 65 member organizations, 400,000 members, mostly women. And we certainly will celebrate, but also work hard and do a lot of lobbying in order to take steps forward in achieving gender equality in our country. We do not wish to wait for another 110 years. Next year is nationally important because of the upcoming municipality elections. Mentioned the grassroots level by Eva, my chair, and as well the media connections. I'm pleased to announce that the Finnish national broadcasting company YLE will be a partnering organization for the next year's anniversary campaign. And this webinar is also organized in the context of the preparations to the anniversary celebration. And one of our main priority is to continue a strong connection to the global and European levels, as well as with the Nordic countries. We definitely want to do our part with the rights of women at all these levels. This is why we are especially pleased and honored that in this webinar we have received high-level speakers from two such excellent organizations as Equality Now and European Women's Lobby. We are your biggest fans. As well as our fantastic colleague Sirpa Pietikäinen, member of European Parliament and chair for Martha organization, and Sirpa even being a member of the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee of the European Parliament, even in the meeting right now, if I understood right. The role of women's organization is crucial, especially in this time of crisis. We are needed when anti-gender movements are rising and the pandemic pushes women's rights aside. And it gives us strength, especially in these times, to work together, to speak together with a common voice. So we are excited to have all of you, such a large number of participants registered, a wide range of our member organizations, also new followers from Finland and globally. All together online to speak about women's rights and the work of women's organizations. So what can we do to promote women's rights internationally and online? How can we as women's organizations better cooperate, encourage one another, and raise our voice in the midst of pandemic? Eva, over to you.
So well, thank you, Terhi. It's quite exciting to have you here, and I would like to just shortly introduce our guest speakers. Dr. Yasmeen Hassan, you are the International Equality Prize winner of 2019. This, of course, is perhaps not your biggest achievement, but for us, it is a big thing. Global Executive Director of Equality Now, you have a history, you have grown up in Pakistan, you now are living in New York, you have been in Equality Now, at least as a director, global director from 2011, but already before that, working as an expert on violence against women, but also with UN and with CEDAW. You hold a magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, and you have studied Islamic law and women's rights, which of course in our part of the world feels really fascinating, and we have so much to learn from you. And of course you also hold a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. You have a fantastic CV, and your work has been truly global. I'm so glad to have you. I'm equally glad to have Mary Collins from the European Women's Lobby, which is an absolutely essential organization for us in Europe, for all the women and women's organizations in Europe. And we are so proud and happy to be working with you as an expert in economic and social policies there. We really need your expertise to be able to somehow gather round to be a much stronger voice for the women in Europe. And at the moment it feels more necessary than ever. And of course then Sirpa Pietikäinen, who is a long-time friend of mine, of course. I remember her as a very young minister of environment ages ago. And then of course she has done a lot of different things, but I think not the least with her, she is a fantastic commentator because she always brings in new perspectives. And today she is also bringing the perspective from the politician in Europe. So, my friends, may I kindly ask you if you briefly just could introduce your organizations, as well as perhaps open up a little bit the successful work done by Equality Now and of course European Women's Lobby lately, and feel free just to show us a little bit of what you do and what you feel is important. And please, Yasmeen, I think I would like you to start.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for having me. And a big thank you to you, Eva, and to Turkey, who not only are movers and shakers in women's rights, but I consider friends. So it's wonderful to see you. It's been 9 months since we were all in Finland getting the Gender Equality Prize, which was a high point. You say it's not all our achievement, but it really was a high point for equality now. And I want to commend the leadership of the government of Finland for even creating that prize. I'll tell you reasons why is that the work of women's rights is so difficult and there are so many small organizations doing it. And there's often like, you're talking about the backlash and we are moving uphill and there's no recognition. So this was a fantastic time for us and we love being in Finland, and thank you to the city of Tampere. And I'll tell you a little bit about Equality Now. So Equality Now is a global human rights organization that was founded in 1992. And in 1992, women's rights were not seen really as human rights and part of the human rights field, but we were seen as more like the culture of women's rights. And so Equality Now was founded by 3 lawyers from around the world, South Africa, Iran, and the US, to change that situation. I have been working with Equality Now since I first met them in 1993. And this is what we do. We know that law is extremely important. And what a state says about its citizens and their rights and their value will determine their life, basically. So it's not the end all and be all, but equality under the law is an essential first step to achieving gender equality. So Equality Now works with grassroots organizations all over the world to achieve equality for women and girls around the world. And in that equality, we also look at all forms of violence against women and to make sure that laws prohibit all forms of violence against women and that these laws are implemented. So that in a nutshell is the work. And we are present, as you said, I am based in New York. So we have a very strong presence in New York. Our biggest office is in Nairobi, Kenya. And, our director, Faiza Muhammad, was with me in Finland, and we were very happy to be there. We have another office in London, which does all the European and the Eurasian work. And we have an office in Beirut, where we do Middle Eastern work, and then presence in Georgia, in the Northern Caucasus of Russia, in Jordan, and in India. So that's the family of Equality Now. Overall, we are like under 50 staff members, but we take on the world. So that's the work that we do. And I think that right now you said some of the key things we are very excited about. I'll be very brief. One thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, we just launched our 5th report on sex discriminatory laws around the world. We actually used the prize money from Finland to boost that report. And from that, we have launched the first ever global campaign on discriminatory family laws around the world. And that happened in March. It was supposed to be Beijing plus 25 and the Commission on the Status of Women. We got shut down because of the pandemic, and we did the launch online. So that's one of the things. And I'll tell you another thing we are very excited about, and it became even more relevant. In the beginning of the year, we won a case at the ECOWAS court, which is a West African court, against the government of Sierra Leone. And what had happened in Sierra Leone is before this pandemic, they had the Ebola pandemic in Sierra Leone. Girls' schools were shut down and girls were put out of school. They became pregnant because there was a lot of sexual violence. And there was a culture of, using girls for girls for food. They had to give sex to just move around and all that. When the Ebola crisis was over, a lot of girls were pregnant. And the government of Sierra Leone, instead of looking at why these girls were pregnant and what it could do, they banned pregnant schoolgirls from school. So their education was also ended. So Equality Now brought a case at the West African court with Sierra Leone's group. And we won at the beginning of this year. And in March, as we went into lockdown with this pandemic, the government lifted the ban and we are working with them. So I'm very proud of this, particularly when now there's a pandemic that is global and we are looking at all the impact on women and girls around the world. So I'll stop here. I know I go on and on, but it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Don't be scared. We will stop you if you go too long. It's extremely interesting, and congratulations with this victory. I think that's extraordinary. And it's so important for us also to hear about of the success stories also. and of course how you can actually address structures and they have a meaning for all of us, you know, the least wealthy or the smallest girl from the most remote village. I think it's so interesting when you say that you are global, because we also see that we have very different circumstances in different countries. Do you think this is a challenge for you that you work globally, or do you feel that there are, you know, more similarities? I mean, how do you address this, you know, diversity among us?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Globally.
No, so that's a really good question, because our basis, the basis on which we operate, is that issues faced by women all around the world have a common source, and that is patriarchy and, you know, the control by men of resources and the control of women's bodies and all that. The context of how this plays out differs all around the world, right? But to be able to show the commonality of the issues women face and build solidarity among women without saying you are worse or you are better is very critical to what equality now does, right? So when we see the issue of child marriage in countries like, you know, Yemen and Saudi Arabia, then we also look at that same issue of the sexualization of younger and younger girls in the US and many European countries. And what is the effect of all this? It means that girls are forced into sex at an earlier age, and their autonomy and their control over their body is taken away before they're mentally even ready. So if you connect all the dots of this kind of stuff, you see that practices exist around the world. And then there are global practices like rape exists all over the world, domestic violence exists all over the world. Female genital mutilation now, which used to be a practice that was thought to be an African practice, is all over the world. You know, sex trafficking, which is a $99 billion global business, affects every country of the world. So it's making the commonalities known and connecting women and saying all our problems are from the same source. I will tell you that in the current political global climate, where we have rising racism, rising sexism, rising xenophobia, and unfortunately we have a lot of men who've been elected who are, in my belief, the worst kind of men, right, around the world. And we are now challenged in trying to show the commonality, right? Because there are attempts to divide us based on race, based on nationality, based on, you know, sexual orientation and all that. So we are, you know, the women's rights movement really has to pull together and work as one. So, I can't.
Sorry, now, thank you. This is extremely interesting what you are saying, and I think we can continue with this discussion also, but wanting to take in Mary Collins. Could you also start with introducing a little bit your work in Brussels?
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that my camera is on and my microphone, you can hear me okay? Yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much for the invitation. And I would like to send also apologies on behalf of Joanna Maycock, who unfortunately had an emergency and wasn't able to be with you today. However, she did ask me to convey her very best wishes to you all, and she's sorry to be missing this important event. So indeed, this year is extremely different, as everybody has said so far, but that hasn't impacted on our determination to move forward with our with the work for a world in where equality between women and men is a reality, because there is no country, as we all know, in the world, in the whole world, where equality actually exists. So that's kind of a daunting fact as we enter the 21st century, and we're still facing a lot of the issues that we have been facing for many years and many decades. So in terms of the European Women's Lobby, and as most of you probably know, yourselves, you're a member, and we're very, very happy to have you. It is the largest women's organizations in the European Union. It's comprised of over 2,000 women's organizations coming from 30 countries. So that's the current 27 EU member states, the 3 accession countries, and also the United Kingdom. We also have membership of European-wide organizations who are specifically focusing on some specific issues. For example, the Women's Committee of the European Trade Union Confederation, the Women's Committee of the European Disability Forum, also the Network of Migrant Women, business and professional women, etc. So together we are, as you said yourself, fearless. And the mission and the vision is really to have a feminist Europe. And what does that mean? It means that in every single policy area, program, funding, has to be a vision that is shaped on a vision that feminist vision. And as Yasmeen just said, our common enemy in this is patriarchy. So it's about moving beyond that. But it's not just about responding to what's coming forward. It's also shaping that agenda and putting our issues on the table. So in the past couple of years, we have seen some breakthrough. As Yasmeen said as well, it's been tough, it's been hard, there's been a lot of backlash, and it's constantly being vigilant. But some of the breakthroughs that we saw, for example, we ran a campaign, a 50-50 Europe for Women, Women for Europe campaign, which we started in 2018 in view of the European elections, which happen every 5 years. And I think we were quite successful. We had mobilized really a critical mass, both through our membership, but also in, among political parties, and for gender parity. It's about 50-50. And we are happy to see at the end of that process and the beginning of the 5 years is that we do have more women in leadership at European level. We have more women in the European Parliament, and we have, for the first time in European history, the European Commission President was a woman. And what we can certainly see is a total change of tone, of style, of a real sense of, wow, this is really fresh air. However, having said that, and as the saying goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So we're at the beginning of this process of 5 years, but we feel quite optimistic that we have women in leadership. And also, alongside that, as you say yourself, in your own country, you have real feminist political leadership as well. And we can see in the countries, and you can count them on one hand, where women are leaders, that during the COVID pandemic, particularly at the beginning, they're the ones that actually did the best in terms of really putting the issue on the table, and really looking at what the real issues was really recognizing women's role in upholding society, really. Another area I'd say where we can see progress, and which may seem a little bit contradictory, is in the area of violence against women. The fact that it is on the political agenda now is actually really a very positive step forward, insofar as that, I myself, I was working on this for the last 20 years, and I remember in the beginning, bringing this issue to the attention of policymakers, particularly at European level, and they laughed at us. They said, "Whoa, that's got absolutely nothing to do with public policy, certainly not in the context of Europe, the single market, etc., etc." But we were successful because women don't give up. And I think that's where the patriarchal system has undermined the fact that we have lots of energy, and that there may be rollbacks, but we keep going so that we really stand our ground. So we believe that the response during the pandemic as well to violence against women was really very encouraging. And we could see that in a number of countries like Spain, they decided that shelters was an essential service, so really supported it. In other countries like in France, in Italy, they provided a specific app which was related to law enforcement agencies. And in other countries like Belgium, Germany, the hotel sector provided temporary shelter for women fleeing situations of violence as well. So that was a really good, we believe, a very good response. However, it's all short term. And the question now is, how do we embed that really political response into a more structural and long-term commitment to really addressing violence against women in all its forms. We were also, on the other hand, then in Europe, as you know, there's the Istanbul Convention, which is, having a lot of dilemmas, and some countries are wanting to pull out, some countries have pulled out, some countries are not willing to have it ratified. So there's a lot of tension, and certainly if the Istanbul Convention had been ratified prior to the pandemic and the explosion of the pandemic at the beginning of the year, we certainly would have had already in place a lot of the structural services and responses. So it really shows that the Istanbul Convention is absolutely vital. So what we were able to do as well during this period, we were able to gather our members from those countries where it's specifically difficult, and to meet with the Commissioner for Equality, Commissioner Dalli, just to find ways forward of, how can we actually move together on this so that we can really break that deadlock, because it really is a deadlock. So on the one hand, violence against women became very visible and politically visible. But on the other hand, then there's a backtrack when it comes to the Istanbul Convention. And as you know, the European Union itself has signed, but it's stuck now in terms of the ratification because of some countries stating that it's against the law and constitutions, etc. But we think it's more political, and we believe that it would be possible. But there is a court case for the moment, and we're waiting for the outcome of that to see what those arguments will be. But it's certainly something that we are not going to give up on at all. What we have also seen in the last couple of, say, year, because this is also before COVID, is a greater awareness around spending and gender budgeting. The concept of gender budgeting has become a concept that is more talked about now, but only talked about. But we could see, for example, that amongst the new members of the European Parliament, there certainly was a great interest to bring this as a tool of gender mainstreaming into the budgeting and the financial instruments of the European Union. And for once, we've had a gender impact assessment carried out by some of these specialists and the experts on gender budgeting in Europe, and under the auspices as well of the MEP from Germany, Alexandra Geis. And that's the first time that really has been done in terms of the stimulus plan and in terms of the long-term budget as well. We're also awaiting a report from the Court of Auditors, who in fact is answering the question, or has the question in front of it: is the EU budgeting achieving equality between women and men? It's unfortunate that it'll only come out next year, but it's in the pipeline and it's in the making, which would be really good. When I say unfortunate it's next year, it's because we're now faced with a recovery plan, a stimulus plan, and a budget, which if we had those kind of tangible arguments now from the Court of Auditors, we would very clearly be able to show that no, the spending does not go to achieve equality between women and men. Just another issue maybe to mention that, for the last decade, what we've really seen in the last year as well, and even longer, is that the neoliberal model is not working. And we've had a decade of austerity, which in fact has led to a decrease in public investments in public services. And we're now paying the price. We saw at the beginning of the COVID, the staff, there wasn't enough staff in hospitals, in care homes, etc. There wasn't equipment, there wasn't anything, which showed very clearly that the austerity measures had a huge negative impact right across every country. And therefore we need to move beyond austerity and move into recovery. And so we actually published at the beginning of this year, January, just before all hell broke loose, what we call a Purple Pact. And the Purple Pact is a proposal for a feminist economic model. And it contains proposals within that looks at tax, at budgets, at spending, and particularly care. And we believe that care is an issue that is the backbone of society. And it was very, very apparent during the last couple of months, and still is. So we're really calling now for a care deal for Europe. So these are some of the issues that we've been working on for the last, over the last year, and which we believe will hopefully together will push us towards changing that economic model, because it has an impact on everything else. And as Yasmeen said, it's the patriarchal system that upholds, and within it, the neoliberal system, which at the end of the day is really, really not working. So also during this period, we've had really strong solidarity between all of our members, and it's really brought us together in ways that we had never imagined, even through the screens. We never thought we would be sitting looking at each other through screens, but it really has created a bonding and a sense of solidarity. And I really join what Yasmeen said about it doesn't matter where it is, globally, locally, regionally. Really, the issues are very similar, and it's about joining those dots, as you say, and about having a holistic perspective on women's rights, gender equality, and really moving forward together. Because I think perhaps one of the things that has emerged from this is that some things are becoming extremely clear, and the inequalities so clear that you cannot refuse to look at them in the face at this stage. So there's some of the things that we've been working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And I know there's really a lot. Before I'm letting Sirpa in, I would like to perhaps ask you, Yasmeen, a little bit that how do you, and of course, I mean, the situation also, as you could hear with Europe, is that there has been a lot of discussion on austerity. But of course, at the moment, we are living in a completely different economy. We're actually not, we're actually doing a lot of recovery funding, and I think all countries are doing so. In a way, we would now need to see, of course, that this is happening also in a way that is considering gender equality and taking into account, you know, whose jobs, whose health, and so forth. And I think that's really, really important to focus on also now. But may I ask you, Yasmeen, you have been sort of working on legislation, of course, and I think that, to me at least, and I would like to recommend, I think Instagram is you are working with Instagram quite marvelously, showing, I mean, different pieces from globally of achievements and successes, but perhaps also on challenges, and I would like to return, because we talked about, because Mary talked a lot about the economy and the system, and this, of course, is extremely important. But you talk about legislation, and you're not so much focusing into different countries' economies. So tell us a little bit about that. How this, of course, makes a complete. But why is it still so important? And can you tell some of the laws that you have been able to change?
Well, we have many kinds of laws, so lots of laws on violence against women. And, you know, I do understand that we are in a period of backlash right now, right? But that also means that we have been successful. Backlash always comes when you have had periods of success. And I'll tell you, in the last 20 years, for example, from the time, 25 years from the time of Beijing conference, where there was almost no laws against violence against women, right? There are domestic violence laws now in nearly every country, 152 countries. Trafficking laws are all over the world. Laws against FGM are 28 countries in Africa where it is practiced, have it. Only 3 countries in Africa that still practice, Mali, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, don't have laws against FGM, and we are working hard for that. Plus, all over the world. We just launched our global report on FGM, which shows that there are 92 countries in the world where women are suffering from FGM. These include European countries, Canada, America, Australia, and all those, you know. So there has been we are collecting all the data on laws and on practices around the world, and then we are pushing for the reform of those laws. What I'm proud of, you said, what are some of the recent changes? We have been very successful in calling out, as we become a very globalized world, there were laws in many, many countries where women were not able to pass their nationalities to their husbands or their children. So we did a global campaign a few years ago on nationality law. And, this was like, as we are becoming a globalized world, you're not even a full citizen. And the burdens that placed on women and their children was huge. So a lot of countries changed those laws to give women equal rights to pass their nationality to their spouses. Another area was laws. I mean, this was actually very surprising to me, but it's a holdover of the colonial times, where there are lots of laws of rape. And I know we discussed, you discussed, Eva, like that Finland will be changing its law on rape. But there were laws actually that allowed rapists to go free if they married their victim. Because what was the concept was, if a woman is raped, it's a crime against her honor and it's a crime against the family. So if you marry this person who you've just raped, can you imagine that? So we very recently, in the last 5 years, we have had a lot of countries, including Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine. There is a bill before the Iraqi parliament to change these kind of laws. Again, then there are laws about where women can work. What are the hours that they can work? What are women's property rights? There are many countries that don't allow a married woman to own any property. So I'll tell you where we have not had, there have been changes all over. Where the progress has been the least is on the issue of family law. And this is why we were very excited to launch our Global Family Laws campaign. And the reason is, where we've not had progress is where family laws are tied with religion or tradition. And those are, I always say, religion and tradition is a hammer on women's back, right? Like, I would say religion and tradition is supposed to be so positive. You believe in something. It's a great thing. This is your tradition. You're proud of it. Why are we using it to keep women down? But that is what is happening around the world. And reason we did not have progress is women's rights groups like ours also shied away for dealing with religion. And we said, we are going to look at global norms and, all the, human rights standards. Whereas more and more people around the world, and I don't know how this is in Finland, are getting increasingly religious at this time. America, for sure, right? In the US. So if you don't address your rights within religion, I think that you have left that whole field up to very conservative people to take on. So in March, for the first time, we worked together with Christian groups, Muslim groups, Jewish groups, Hindu groups to see women working within religion. How do we reclaim family laws and make sure that those laws treat women equally? And you know why? The sad part about this was that when we went into the pandemic, people went into lockdown and they were locked down with their families. And that laid bare to us the inequality in the family can have devastating consequences, whether it's about violence against women, whether it's about what you're entitled to in the family. So I'm excited finally to take this big step. One of our big partners is Musawa, which is an organization of Muslim women that are working within Sharia law, right? And you had said, Eva, that you were excited that I was an expert in Islamic law. Islamic law all over the world since 1979 has been used in very, very regressive ways. And, we are all familiar with who are the countries at the bottom of the Gender Equality Index. They're all countries where Islam is the dominant religion. And why before 1979, this was not the case. 79, two things happened. Number one, Iran revolution happened and they brought like Shia Islam, and then Saudi Arabia reacted by bringing Sunni Islam and very conservative form of Wahhabi Islam all over the world. These countries were very powerful, and as they fought each other, the Muslim world became very regressive. And as we had a surgence of women's rights movements in these countries who did not want to relate to Islam or deal with Islam, Islam became in the hands of very, very conservative people, and women's rights got taken away. And so now, we are supporting this group, Musawa, to take back the night, So, and we are hoping that there will be, number one. So I'm going to get to your other point about also how awareness raising and use of media and social media has to be part of it. look, I do understand that social media has many, many bad things. You know, there's all this online sexual exploitation, there's revenge porn, there's all sorts of, but we really have to use it to spread awareness among women who are divided and usually kept apart. You know, in a lot of these countries, women don't even know other women and all that. So the use of social media, the use of media, which I know, Eva, you talked about in Finland, you have great media partnerships. I think it is critical for us at Equality Now and for our partners to get awareness in the world, including women who might not even know that they are part of structures that are keeping them down. So I think Equality Now tries to do that in a way, have media partnership and also partnerships with content creators, whether they are documentary filmmakers, whether they are popular show creators. One great partnership we had was with a show called The Handmaid's Tale. I don't know if you guys have seen it in Finland. It's like Margaret Atwood is a key partner to Equality Now. And when she wrote the book, it was really based about actual situations women face around the world.
That's incredible.
Right? And
Yeah.
so we reached out to her and she said, I've been using your work and the things that you see to write these, you know, kind of dystopian novels. And so we partnered with her, and because she chose us as the charity partner for her new book, The Testaments, which is the second sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. And as a result of that partnership, in a matter of 3 weeks, we increased our supporters and Action Day by 30,000 people. So, you know, so I think that part of, like, I can go on and on about media partnerships and, you know, popular partnerships, getting people to know the stuff and take action on issues, whether it's in Iraq, in Jordan, in Finland, in Sweden. Having global people be aware of the issues and take action is a powerful tool. And we try to use that, you know, to the benefit of women and girls. That's a long answer. I'm sorry again.
No. We could listen to you forever. I think that we have so much to learn from both of you, also in working sort of in with the public and trying to sort of get people engaging. But I want to give, because Sirpa Pietikäinen, she is in the middle of her meeting and she has promised also to come and comment. I think this religion thing, of course, has a resonance in Christian circles in Europe also, and in other religions. So it seems that no religion seems to be completely sort of free from this kind of conservative ideas. So I think we do feel again that this is something that we really, really need to share and experience how to work against it. But Sirpa, please, I will come back to you later, but are you on the line? Sirpa Pietikäinen.
Yes, I'm on the line, and sorry, I do not have the video connection because of poor bandwidth. Believe me or not, in Finland there are places where you really can't stream both the video and the voice. But anyway, you can trust that I look almost the same that I did about half a year ago. Anyway, thank you to Yasmin and Mary. It has been so thought-provoking and inspiring to hear both of you, and so easy to continue after your presentations, because I think that you picked up almost all the most important points. It's an excellent analysis, and thank you for cooperation with the European Parliament also, because this is exactly, especially European Women's Lobby, how we push forward the initiatives, we increase the understanding, and we create new policies. So I hope that we could do that not only with European Parliament, but this is a bit to Eva and Terhi, also between the women's other organizations and with national parliaments. And actually what I would like to start, and it's a bit the media, I've read during the last time a couple of interesting articles and studies about the new chauvinism that is called the petro-religious populistic chauvinism. And it sort of describes to me pretty well what it is. It's against climate change, it is for fossils, it's against change, against the environment in general, it is religious, whatever you name it, doesn't matter. You can always misuse religious purposes and goals. And then this populistic, chauvinistic We know all our Trumps and others all over the world, and that actually it's gaining the floor, and because it's not exposed, it's thought to be sort of a separate phenomenon, and actually it is the same phenomenon, the oppression of the women, that is actually increasing, plus this whole struggle that is going to increase in the field of climate, and this kind of a misogyny that is also increased. So this is just something I hope that someone of you could grab, and with some of the female studies, and maybe we could sort of find out something interesting and to organize something in these fields to see that, okay, this is a pattern that is global. Then my general analysis would be, with some years' experience, that there are sort of a three-ways development globally also, but in the EU, three-headed dragoon in this area of gender. In one hand, this sort of a backlash, and I refer to populist movements, and I refer to Poland and Hungary, and I refer the anti-abortion movement, and things that I never thought when I was in about 50 years ago that we would really be struggling on these days. And it's so very saddened that we would need to sort of get our grips much stronger, because, for example, in Parliament, we really need to be fighting for Istanbul Convention. And believe or not, EPP used to be for sexual and reproductive rights and abortion about 10 years ago, and now we've struggled to have a free vote on it. So it just sort of describes where we stand. And our coordinator, Frances Fitzgerald, is a good woman, so it's not about her and not about me and a couple of other vice noses, but the majority still, it's pretty gloomy and dark that it is sort of a mushroom there in the dark. Then the successes are still there, and I sort of like to put a lot of emphasis in these structural measures if we can push them through. And one of my favorites is, of course, gender impact assessment. If we could put it on the EU budgets, on the EU semester, on national budgets, and on all of our legislation. And I'm very also very sort of positive and optimistic about the Ursula von der Leyen. She takes this issue seriously, and I'm very much looking forward for the new equality program that is coming there. And I understood that she's going to increase the resources there. So my first point: make it transparent. And there, my biggest struggle and worry is that, of course, the role of European Gender Equality Institute, IGEP, because that is hated by many sort of political forces, and we would need to sort of secure and mandate to produce these kinds of information and impact assessments and impact assessment methodologies. Make it transparent. That's my favorite. And the second, and this is to me sort of a part of the package, but special focus on the budget, is what we've talked about quite a lot, and already the gender budgeting. And this is gaining sort of the majorities in parliament votes. The commission has promised to move forward on here, and let's hope the council also would. And so if we could put the media where you, Yasmin, were referring, and then Mary, you talked quite a lot about this gender budgeting and impact assessment on place, we would have significant steps forward. Then, of course, it is the rights-based approach that is very important. And what I mean by this, I'm just trying to close my phone. Sorry about this, bit embarrassing. Well, anyway, so the point here is that we could then move with a couple of the other fields. And what I'm hoping to have in the equality program is this kind of a review of existing situation and legislation. Okay, we do have the equality principle in paychecks, never happened. Commission never sued any member states of this not happening. We know the complexity, how it impacts the pensions and everything. And so we would need to see what actually is in there, but it is not implemented. And this would need to be then, as I said, in the right-based approach. And in the rule of law, when we have the rule of law, hopefully at some form in place. So part of it is, of course, the gender, human rights and gender, like it is according to Venice Convention, and we would just need to take care that it stands there, and we have a firmer grip on Poland, for example. Well, I'm trying to rush through because I know that you would want to have a bit of a time for discussion. And I would like to only touch two things, and these are sort of these intermediate things. The Istanbul Convention, a huge fight where the parliament finally got a majority, clear majority vote for it, and we all know the problems in the council. And this is so important because you know better than I do how the violence is defined there. And that would open the floors for structural violence and inequalities in our societal forms, and sort of the linkage between the services also, and the inequality in work life and work-life balance, work home life balances and work care balances. Then another deal that we are about what we are struggling in the parliament is what you rightly mentioned about the care deal for Europe. And it would need to include, of course, the public services and underline the importance of the public services for equality. And then the informal care part too. And acknowledge what needs to happen there, both so that we support the people, because if people want to live at home, I don't have anything against that, and the community-based care, but it should not to be invisible and left on the shoulders of women. And I've been trying to raise the fact that actually the whole care issue, and especially the care of elderly people, it is a gender issue. If you look at the figures, who are those one living older and needing the care? Who are those one with memory disabling diseases? Who are the informal carers? Who are black market care workers? Who are the public and private sector care workers? This is a gender issue, if anything is. And this, of course, links then to this COVID. And I don't know whether it actually fits the this sort of a frame of agenda, but it's outrageous what has been happening in our care homes, as we know, and in care sector during the COVID. And somehow we would need to raise this, that, okay, this is of course human rights violation and violation against elderly people, but this is the intersectional feminism. Look who happened to be the people that you are talking about. It is mainly women that were left alone. It was mainly women that were working as nurses, who didn't have enough hands, who didn't have the equipment, and so on and so on. And sort of to say these kind of structural issues too, and the otherwise too, how it hit harder, like all the economic crises, women in general. So these are sort of my points. A lot of fight to just to stand our feet there where we are. A lot of positive possibilities in this kind of a structural competence matters if we could use them. Sort of this kind of a semi-automatic, like the impact assessment and gender budgeting, and hopefully the law review. And then the Istanbul Convention, and then the sort of economic COVID issues. And sorry, I just need to mention one thing. That sort of I know it's talked a lot, but it's really bothers me. I don't. I'm bothered personally, but not that much. But I know that it is outrageous how especially women and young women are bullied in social media, especially if they have opinions, and that is a hate speech, and we would need to get it under the label of hate speech, even though there aren't any ethnic reasons. And people should be sued, and this should be taken seriously by the police, and not the way that it is that you can go and mock anyone and say horrible and rude personal and political things, and try to intimidate and so on, because this is part of this petro-religious populistic movement that sort of gets a main target. Even nowadays, it seems it is these young women and women in power positions like the Finnish government, much more than whatever they do with the refugees. That is the second best hate point. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss with you.
Thank you, Sirpa. And Terhi also winks at Sirpa is, of course, a long experienced politician, both in Finland and in the European Parliament, former minister in Finland, and today actually also president of one of the biggest organizations of women called the Marta organization, which is quite fantastic, which actually gathers women both from rural areas and cities, traditionally more rural areas, but today all kinds of women and has become a very strong ecological and sort of self-determination and self-sufficiency promoting organization, if I may say so. Before you leave, Sirpa, I don't know if and perhaps Yasmin and Mary, it seems, you know, of course, our agenda is so enormous. And of course, we have a lot, and we cannot leave anything out, and we have different spaces to work on different issues, and that's fine. But I somehow have a very strong feeling that we still need today to really fight back the backlash and to take a leap. We somehow also need to have something that we focus on, or a few agendas that can be sort of recognized, you know, coming from everywhere at the same time, that we would be stronger. And of course, the violence against women is, of course, one evident, I think, point. And then, of course, the gender impact assessment, I think also, but it's a very challenging area. It sounds easy, but it easily becomes this sort of broad thing, only words. And somehow we have difficulties to get a grip. So what I would like to ask you, would there be something where we actually now, when we have this recovery funding, a lot of more spending suddenly, should we just first focus on how this money now that is actually being as a response, and to see what are the employment sort of measures, you know, just to be more concrete, because it's quite difficult. And then, of course, I think something else. Is it working with the media, or is it trying to change, you know, attitudes, and how media speaks about these things, how media, the representation in media, but also the way we are addressed or our issues are addressed. I don't know. Do you have any opinions on this? Because sometimes I get this feeling that it's that we are all over the place so much. And it's difficult because we also need to be that. But Sirpa, before you leave, could you just shortly say if you have some thoughts on your mind on this, and then we continue with Yasmin and Mary.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And I was sort of reserving my Marta comments on this latter part. To me, this is a bit like the recipe. You can't sort of cook the potatoes for fish soup and say, wonder why it doesn't taste like a fish soup. You can't, and then cook the carrots differently and onions and so on. You have to have the whole palette, and then indeed when you do, it isn't that more complex to put all the ingredients in the soup, and then what you get out is different than if you cook differently, I mean separately, the potatoes, onions and fish and so on. And this is why I think that we always should have this broad sort of a aspect of doing the things. And so bearing in mind that yes, and this is what the European Parliament is doing, and I hope Terhi, you could be fighting in Finland, that yes, all the rescue and recovery should go to zero fossils, and that it is a gender issue too, if you look who is suffering most from the climate change. And then it all should have the gender impact assessment. But at the same time, you should have all the other aspects going on. So you shouldn't sort of settle for less. And that sort of goes a bit to, when I'm talking about recipes, to this Marta principle and the actions. And it has very sort of a prestige history, and hopefully nowadays and future also, because we were the biggest women's empowerment movement in Finland before anyone even talked over 100 years ago in Finland about women's empowerment. And the complex, the sort of a set was the thing that I think that we need to be doing nowadays too, and not only in developing countries, but all over. Empower women. Empower them with knowledge, education, empower them with financial resources and capability of taking care of themselves and their families. Empower women with new kind of tools of self-sustaining abilities, and empower them by noting that you are not alone. There are a lot of women thinking like you and men that matter. But while this is women's organization, women in that sense that work side by side with you. And so it gives you the power that, okay, yes, we can make the change in public procurement, in what kind of a care solutions is made in my local place. Yes, we can together pressurize the Finnish government, and yes, we can pressurize the parliament members in European Parliament or the Commission or whatever to make the change what we want to see. And yes, indeed, a bit like in women's organizations, at best is we come from different political backgrounds, and still we can work together for the same goals. And this is sort of the essence in this Marta concept that I find so valuable now when we are trying to tackle the climate change and sustainable living, not leaving anyone behind. That is the social justice and capabilities, links very well with the care deal. And then this ability to grasp digitalization and the new ways of working together.
Thank you, Sirpa. Thank you. I don't know how long you can stay with us, but say hi before you have to leave. Yasmeen, please, what's your view? How do you sort of find the agenda? How could we get this leap forward?
No, I listened very closely to what Mary was saying and what Sirpa was saying, and I think Europe is at a different place. Like, to be very frank, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff that there's awareness. The women's rights groups have been, even though we have a backlash there, there's a different level of recognition. We have the Istanbul Convention. There's a lot of stuff that is happening and going for Europe. Now, that is not necessarily true for the rest of the world, okay? So in Africa, for example, we have the Maputo Protocol, which is the most far-reaching, women's rights treaty, which is very specific about rights of widows, rights of adolescent girls, FGM and all that. And we are really working hard to get all countries to do that. Yeah. In Latin America, we have Belém do Pará, which is a convention on violence against women. So the groups there are also very well organized. We have nothing in the Middle East. We have nothing in Asia. We have not, Eurasia is a place that, funding hasn't even gone. Women's rights organizations haven't even been supported in that area. So when I look all over the world, I agree on all these principles, but I take a step back and look at what is it that we built our whole movements on. And after World War II, we really built them upon a human rights infrastructure under the UN right now. And I think with all the stuff that's happening in the world, that infrastructure is getting incredibly threatened when countries like the United States, that were one of the key countries that were holding the consensus of countries coming together, having human rights standards, having reporting and all that, when they're backing out, when then there's China that never kind of played ball, there's Russia, there's Brazil, the biggest country in Latin America, that is going backward, and then there's India that is like, killing of Muslims and like rapes of women. I mean, so these big players are actually causing the entire world's human rights system to be in question. And to me, it's like before we even, it's great, like based on European context and African context, we can have priority, but I think the world priority is really number one, to recommit and say, we stand by the system and we are going to talk together and we are going to uphold these rights, and that women are central. I think what's happening after this pandemic is that people have said, okay, there's recovery and we have to, but a lot of places, they're not understanding, number one, the impact of women on the pandemic and how women's rights are central to us overcoming this pandemic and, having a different way of the future. And we can say it, but is in my own country, Pakistan, is there any recognition of this? No, there's none at all, right? So I think that just the awareness, and that's where we come into media and other forms of awareness raising of understanding. We have so many studies right now which show that women's rights, number one, are key to a better future for all, right? We have studies that were done about 5 years ago where the level of gender equality in any society is directly related to the peacefulness of that society, right? So we want peace and security going forward. So it's conflict inside a society and conflict directed out. So, when you look at the US, you look at a lot of like countries in the Arab world and all that are driven by conflict, the level of gender equality is very marginal. So for me, it's like the awareness raising of how women's rights and women's equality is central to a world post-recovery, and also spending recovery dollars on just equality more than even just care. What is it? Like all the work that we do, I think is more and more central in a post-pandemic world. But what I fear is that, number one, I think just like a lot of businesses around the world are going to be wiped out forever after this pandemic, so will a lot of grassroots women's rights organizations. They are really struggling. And that is when we look at the network, like for Equality Now and also European Women's Lobby, to function in any way, you are dependent on the existence of women's rights groups in all the countries. If those get wiped out, there's no resources, or because of the backlash, they are just shut down by the government, we are not going to be able to stand up to equality around the world. So those are some of the things I worry about. And I think that we really have to, when we had Beijing +25, I was like, we really need to be, and this is before the pandemic, we really need to focus on recommitment of the world to the system that we have set up since World War II. Because if that disintegrates, it's everybody for themselves and women are going to suffer. So.
Thank you, Yasmeen. Really serious message to us also in Europe. And I think you are right. I think, and I think Mary could perhaps want to continue on this. I think even if you say we are in a different place, that's sort of partially true. Yeah. But then, of course, we also see these issues that you are these trends on actually questioning the very basic women's rights. So. And we also feel that it's really problematic when the structures that actually are there we have created to be able to follow or monitor or at least have it on the agenda are falling apart. So we are not sort of safe there. But I think this was a serious reminder. Mary, would you like to say something from the European point of view?
Yes, well, thank you very much. First of all, I totally agree with Yasmeen. We have to ensure that we support the UN. The UN is our international human rights apparatus. If that disappears, we have nothing, no matter what region of the world you're living in. So I fully stand by you by saying we need to support. It's been attacked from all corners. for the moment, and we really need to make sure that that does not disappear, you know. So I think that's really important. And with that in mind, next year, 2021, is the 40th anniversary of the CEDAW Convention. And the CEDAW Convention is what I would call the kind of generational blocks for gender equality, for women's rights and gender equality and girls' rights. And I think that we need to bring these blocks together. So there's the CEDAW, there's Beijing, there's SDGs. And I think that there are, you know, younger generations of women who don't know what CEDAW is, but actually CEDAW is legally binding. It actually gives you rights. It actually has accountability mechanisms. And I really think it's an opportunity next year to bring CEDAW into our lives, back into our lives, for those of us who probably have been around for a while, back into our lives, and for those of us who don't really understand it or know it very well, bring it into our lives. And Sirpa was talking about transparency, and it's also about accessibility. And when we talk about the economic framework, yes, it does sound extremely complex, but in a way, are we meant to believe that we can't deal with it? So it's about demystifying that as well, and about saying, but actually at the end of the day, money is power, and power is in the hands of men, primarily men. So we need to be able to come into that space. It's not rocket science. It can completely be demystified, and that's part of our work that we're doing with the Purple Pact, for example, is really bringing it into the lives of every woman, every girl, and particularly at the grassroots, so that you can ask those questions. You can go into whatever space where these, complicated, complex issues are being discussed, but actually you can not only understand what's been said, but you can actually question and challenge the system. So it really is about that. And it's really important, we think, particularly now, and I'm going to come back to the European context again, there is an immediate challenge because we're faced now with a so-called recovery plan, Next Generation EU, plus the proposal for a 7-year budget. So we're looking, we have to also look ahead and make sure that we're looking long-term as well. And it would be absolutely disastrous if those packages with a lot of money are being adopted without a gender perspective. And that probably could happen. And just to come back to Sirpa, and I'm really happy, we're so lucky to have such a fantastic ally in the European Parliament, been so supportive for everything we do. But just to come back to what you were saying as well, is we've just heard now, and I don't want to sound technical, but we've just heard now that the kind of European governance mechanism called the European semester, which was heavy, complex, and whatever, but it did nevertheless give the possibility to have a consultation process about, socioeconomic issues, macroeconomic issues in different countries, and to enable women and women's organization and the feminist movement to be asked questions, to be involved, to give their input. We have heard that has been scrapped, just now, scrapped. And we have heard nothing about how it's going to be replaced. So my question to us all, how are we going to ensure, and what mechanisms are we going to put up to make sure that women on the ground, women's organizations, feminist movement can actually be part of, be consulted on, and shape the distribution of these massive funds that are going to come within the next year? And that is a huge problem, because if we miss that boat, we're gone. We'll be out sailing without any sails for the next 7 years. And coming back, because it is about mobilizing, it's about really having a very strong civil society. Without an independent, critical voice, we will not get anywhere. We really need it. And we have to make sure that there's sustainable funding, and these mechanisms provide for that as well. Sustainable funding so that women's organizations, grassroots movements on the ground can actually challenge and bring to the forefront those questions that absolutely need to be made. Otherwise, we are floating in the sea. So I really think there is that urgency now, coming back to your question about how do we focus on something, when it's all over the place. But these kind of mechanisms will allow a lot of other issues to be addressed, and notably services on violence against women, other issues. Another issue I think that's really important is pay. We're still talking about pay. How many decades after we decided that it was an issue that needed to be addressed in the European Union? 40 years. And we're still grappling with it. So we now need to look at what do we consider to be of equal value, because it's equal pay for equal work or work of equal value. And this is where we really need to hone in on what is value, what do we value as a society? And it comes back to the area, to the whole pandemic brought to the forefront the visibility of women's work and how we take women for granted and how they're underpaid, poor conditions, left in situations where they have no equipment, taking risks and keeping us all together and keeping the society moving. These are the kind of issues now we really, really need to deal with. And again, we will have, hopefully, this possibility of looking at the issue of equal value when the European Commission comes forward before the end of the year with a proposal on pay transparency. So a directive law, because I agree law is the starting point. It's really, really important because it's the only way in which you can actually seek redress as well. So it's really, really important. So this measure will come forward and it's on pay transparency, but the whole issue of equal value, we need to bring that into the context. Because these are the kind of ways we're going to be able to really deal with our broader agenda, which all comes together anyway. But as you say, sometimes we need to focus and we need to be able to say these are our priorities at this given time. But that doesn't mean that everything else is out of the way. And that's the challenge we have of making these links, and we can see it as well at policy level. Everything is still very disjointed. We talk about a Green Deal at the European level, but for us a Care Deal kind of closes the circle of a Green Deal because we're looking at caring for the planet, caring for each other. So it's about really bringing these different issues together, but at some stage we need to focus on what is the top priority so that it can actually have a ripple down effect on the other issues as well. So I think they're the kind of challenges that we're facing, and because of the backlash as well, obviously everything, and like Simone de Beauvoir warned us 70 years ago. She said it'll take any sort of a crisis for women's rights to be undermined. And she said we have to remain vigilant all our lives. So I think we're facing that, again today. But we must be able to see which kind of policies can help us to move. And I also, just coming back to what Sirpa was saying as well, we need to also support each other. I think we need to look after each other, find our friends. Our friends are in different places, in different, places of power and whatever. And I think we need to also kind of conserve energy, support our friends, and really help our friends to bring us along these different paths so that we don't lose everything all at once. So it's about being kind of smart and pulling together and really taking care of each other. So, and to have really strong support mechanisms at European level, but also across the world through the UN processes as well. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. You are so right, both of you. And I think we could have talked longer also about other consequences on COVID, and you have mentioned them. I mean, you have mentioned about what it really has meant in young girls' lives in poor countries, but also in now how the spending is being sort of distributed in a way among different in different sectors, and how we should really be able to require that they are not, that the gender equality matters are not forgotten, that they should be there embedded. We have a little bit of time left. I know people have stayed with us for a very long time. I could sit all night with you, but I still perhaps would like to, because going a little bit when you touched upon working and supporting each other, I think we have new challenge. This is perhaps about policy making, a little bit about our work. I don't know what would be your examples, but to me at least, this anti-gender movement, or in different forms, you touched upon it, but sort of this new trend that has, of course, always been there, but somehow, at least what I felt, that somewhere in between, it was not a politically correct thing to do, but it probably was underneath, but it was not something that people were bold to share. But today, suddenly we have this organized movement against us, and I think, of course, there are other challenges also. You said, Yasmin, that there are risks of dividing women, and I know that, for instance, the racial issue is really a big issue in the US, and of course it is an extremely important issue. How would you sort of see that? What would be our way to work on with these in a way good and bad challenges?
Yes, well, I'll take it. There are definitely challenges, and also, you know, we've discussed this before, Eva, in the women's rights movement,
exactly,
particularly on the issue of whether the commercial sex trade is exploitation of women or whether it's empowerment and agency, right? And I know that European Women Lobby and Equality Now share a view on this, and which is a very left view of the commercial sex trade is exploitation, and there's no part of it which could be agency, right? So in the pandemic, for example, on this particular issue, it's also been laid bare, because when people were locked up in their homes, or Pornhub and sites like that, the viewership of that, first they made them free, it went skyrocketed. We were looking at stuff like, you know, 100% increases in most countries of viewership of Pornhub and all that. What we were seeing is a huge increase of sexual exploitation of young women. And I know Sirpa talked a little bit about bullying, but we are seeing a mass pandemic of sexual exploitation of generally young people, particularly young girls online. That is part of it. And there's a division within the women's rights movement, which really kind of breaks my heart, right? And this is where we also come to the role of UN Women, because when UN Women was formed, I and we all fought hard to have a gender entity at the UN, because at the policy level, the Secretary General prior to the UN Women did not have a gender expert, right? So they were, it was UNFPA, UNDP, other agencies, not a gender agency. And we really fought hard to create that entity. I had thought that UN Women's role was to clarify to all the other agencies and the Secretary General what are the gender issues and how should you perceive every issue with a gender lens. That hasn't happened. And I'll tell you, in the context of this particular issue of exploitation and trafficking, UN agencies, even though we have a Palermo Protocol, which says very clearly, Palermo Protocol is the lead treaty that deals with trafficking in women, and it tells all countries to look at demand for sex. You know, like, because the commercial sex trade is based on demand for sex. Some UN agencies started writing reports way back when, UNAIDS, for example, which said, we believe that the world should legalize, basically fully decriminalize the sex trade, because this is a way to stop AIDS and this is the human rights approach. Now, a lot of women's rights organizations like ourselves and European Women's Lobby said the sex trade is extremely exploitative of women, and it carries on a lot of violence against women, and you can't have this under international law. We've taken this issue up to the Secretary General. Secretary General gave this to UN Women to come and have a UN-wide policy, and that has not happened to this date, right? Because this issue is so polarized. And UN Women basically told me that the other agencies are not, they're stronger, they have bigger financing, and they are not even listening, even if UN Women was to do this. So that's one issue which I think has to be resolved as we are getting into, you know, we are in Beijing plus 25, we are generation equality, and generation equality basically initially excluded women who had this approach. So now Joanna Maycock and I sit on the steering committee of generation equality, but we are not on the core group, which is the NGO group, which is primary. So this is I think that we need to build bridges within the women's rights movement about how to talk about this and how to move the agenda forward, because it is a growing and huge issue. So that's one. You talked about race. That is a big issue in the United States, as we are seeing all the Black Lives Matter movement. You're seeing a lot of leaders here of women's rights movement being called out for racism. And it is, I agree that we should really work on anti-racism and really fix our organization. But at the same time, when we have these big behemoths to fight, right? There are all these guys. I mean, we have the whole administration of the United States, and we are basically fighting among ourselves. It doesn't seem strategic to me, right? So I really, all of these things, I think the women's rights movement is one movement. Women need to be connected to each other based on gender. We need to respectfully find a way to talk about differences and also incorporate all races, all, you know, in a way that there's not leadership, it's on an equal basis. So I think this is a priority for all of us coming together as we get into the next phase. And now I've like lost my train of thought of what I was answering for you. But yeah, I think that the divisions they weaken the movement. And this is a time when the movement has to be really, really strong and really fighting a common enemy. And I don't even like to use the word of fighting a common enemy, right? Like the fight is not where we thought we would be. But unfortunately, I mentioned all the countries before, we are coming into a place where leaders of countries are inciting divisions, right? And so our response to those divisions would be solidarity and not being led by more division. So that is my hope. I think if we need to really look at context, but we really need to come together to say, no, we are like more than half the population in the world. We can push back, you know? So I'll end there. Let it, Mary will have other thoughts.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Yeah, certainly. I mean, I agree that what's extremely worrying is the normalization. That now it's free to say whatever you want to say, and which I think is extremely very, very worrying, because we're looking at a poisonous, toxic climate, which is out to divide us. And I think that, I mean, Black Lives Matter is also an issue in Europe as well. And I think for perhaps in Europe, a lot of European countries, you know, their colonial past, hasn't really been something that they have really looked at. And I think this has given the opportunity to bring these issues on the table. So that's been one of the, I would say, positive spin-offs, so to speak. But I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is to have a diverse movement. And we need to really go out to seek the different voices of different women. And because I think, you know, we're all in this together. And it is about ensuring that it's not, you know, women's rights for some women and not for others, but that it's all women's rights. And while one woman hasn't got her right, no one has. So I think we need to find that dialogue, space for dialogue. And I think it will be conflictual as well. And I think we mustn't either be afraid not to fall into the trap of what the, you know, the toxic, poisonous, patriarchal, anti-gender systems wants to do. Let's not fall into their trap. I think and we have to be very vigilant of that ourselves, and we're going to have to really make sure that that's not going to happen. And I think we just really need to have the diversity of voices, and we need to ensure, and we talk here about intersectionality within our policy framework and our campaigns and our advocacy. But I think we need to also really engage women from the different movements to actually be part of our own one big movement, because we're fighting, and I don't like that word either, but we're how will I say, addressing this together, and we mustn't not fall into that trap. And it's very challenging, and we've done ourselves as part of our 50-50 campaign for the elections, which I spoke about earlier. Part of it was a training module for candidates, for women candidates, called Her Net, Her Rights, to actually give them tools and empower them to be able to face and really cut off all of the harassment, sexism, violence online as well. And as part of this digital strategies as well, we need to really bring this into that level as well, because companies, you were just talking about, the porn industry, they have to take their responsibility as well. And we have to, it can't be impunity forever. So we really need to start tackling these global issues as well, and looking at these platforms that are getting away with murder, let's face it, at the end of the day. And we need to have regulatory systems in place that we can actually together really, hand on, because that's just something that none of us can accept. And we're seeing it coming through, we have to also look at it from where is it coming from too, in different spaces, different places. As I said, the normalization, sometimes it's just so clear that you're woof, but sometimes it's not as clear. It's hidden behind other policies, like sexual and reproductive health and rights, backtracking on abortion. This is where they're coming from too. So we have to also have our ears and our eyes open all of the time. And that's why strengthening our movement is going to help us, again, to conserve our energy, but also to be very vigilant about everything, where it's coming from, because I think it's going to come from spaces we never even imagined it would come from. So I think we need to be vigilant, and we need to really put it on the table. We need discussion. Dialogue is the only way forward, and we need to be able to have those conflicts and those how will I say, heated discussions, which we see in the sexual exploitation, prostitution. But I just want to say to Yasmeen, we had a conversation recently with the UN Women Director, and we raised this issue. Why are you allowing sex worker terminology to be in UN language when in fact it's not UN language? She was very clear. She said very clearly that they, in UN Women, really see it as a form of exploitation, and that men who buy sex are actually exploiters at the end of the day. So she, we were saying we're encouraging her to voice that opinion more and more and more. But she also said, as you mentioned, up against a lot of pull and drag from within the system. And obviously, it's not surprising. UN Women Agency is the poor sister of the system. And again, that's why we really need to be able to support them as well, because they're going to be stronger on our behalf in the system once we can actually be able to do that too. Thank you.
Thank you. So immensely important what you are saying. And I think that this is one of the reasons when Terhi talked in the beginning about the National Council of Women celebrating next year 110 years, we are trying a little bit to reach out also internationally, even if of course our sort of agenda is quite national, but still we feel that we cannot now sort of be isolated, because we need to be so much stronger in this work on gender equality, and in particular on these issues. We feel that we feel that something is happening also out there that we don't want to see. So we want to join and be in cooperation with you, and we want to make it also visible. I would like now to give the floor a little bit to Terhi. She would compile a little bit what has been discussed.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you both. It's been really such a pleasure to listen to you, to speak with you. We feel a bit lonely, without seeing you in person, but I think this is a really special moment for us to have your thoughts, and also that we can share all your ideas and plans for the future as well. It's been especially interesting to listen to your ideas about the post-COVID society and the Beijing Plus 25, and what should be done after this pandemic in women's rights, in women's organizations, and all these trends globally and in Europe about these retro populist chauvinist groups, which we are all aware of. We discussed about women's rights being the key for all progress, and all the peace and security work, awareness rising, all the women's rights violations worldwide, but also all the progress done, which gives us hope and positive impact as well, that so much has taken place. You have worked so actively globally and in the European Union. It really gives us like positive mood as well, not to be too much in the problems only, but so much has happened really. And next year, thinking that there is a Istanbul Convention anniversary, so good, Mary, that you brought this up, and also the problem of sustainable funding also taking place here in Finland and everywhere, I think, with the COVID-19 at this moment. So, and what you said, that we need to support each other, find our friends, and go forward, and very much what Yasmeen underlined with sexual exploitation and the work of the UN, which we must tackle. And we are very lucky that both you and Joanna Maycock, Secretary General of the European Women's Lobby, are participating in that important group. So that's also excellent, and that we have Sirpa Pietikäinen and other excellent MEPs in the European Parliament cooperating with European Women's Lobby. So we can push back, as you said. What I thought, if you think that 110 years has taken, and even more, the oldest member organization of our National Council of Women is soon 165. All this time, women's rights have been progressed, but what would you say? What is your advice for Finland to go forward? I mean, briefly, what would you say? What should we do next?
You want me to go first? Well, I mean, I'm really inspired by all that Finland has been able to achieve, and I know, you know, what Eva mentioned, like the 5 parties led by women. You have a very young woman prime minister. And actually, the last thing that I did before the lockdown was have an event with her in New York, where, you know, Finland has really promoted the work of equality now and the need for global looking at, you know, equality issues and all that. And we did this event, and this is right before the pandemic became, and we had a lot of ministers in your mission, you know, so to hear about the work of equality now and what Finland is doing through the Gender Equality Prize. So I think that was phenomenal. And, you know, I'm very grateful to the government for giving us so many platforms to talk with leaders and ambassadors to the UN to try to move that dial. So I could not be more grateful for that. But when I look at where you could be improving, one of the things I mentioned was our FGM report that came out in the year, and Finland is one of the countries where there is some prevalence of FGM. I think it's about 10,000 or so. And I know that you don't have a specific law on FGM. And I know in this time it also becomes very difficult because some people see it as racist and, you know, calling out this thing. But I think you cannot leave any women behind. So if there are women that are going to be subjected to this practice, we have to call it out. So I would really highly recommend that Finland look into having a law against FGM and implementing that law. And the second thing, I think Eva really brought this up from our perspective, is the law of rape. And you said you're already looking at a consent-based definition of rape, but also we had noticed that the penalties for some, you know, abuse of children, and also penalties for if somebody is in a position of power and basically coerces you, are not the same kind of. So I would also look at those. But I think those kind of things, and I'm very heartened to hear that you're going to do more shelters and probably have funding for that. So that's all I can think of. I think like Finland is really leading on gender equality in so many ways and is committed not only to equality within Finland, but also outside, which is very heartening because you're a small country, but very dedicated, right? So hats off for that. And hopefully those legislative changes will, you know, go into place soon.
Okay, wait, thank you. I also wanted to focus in on your feminist-led leadership. I think it's an extremely good model for Europe, and one in which we should be really pushing to see in other places. And one issue is that again, I'm coming back to the European Union and particularly to the European Council, we don't have a formal council formation on gender equality. So we have one on sport, we have one on fish, we have one on maritime, which I'm not saying are not important, but we have none on gender equality. So how are we going to really, what mechanism are we going to be able to use to ensure, we were talking about budgets and distribution of funds and gender mainstreaming and also gender impact assessment, which is part of gender mainstreaming, but how do we do that when we don't have any space to really formally discuss? So I think if you can push your feminist leaders to push for that at European level, with obviously others, and there will be others that will support that as well. Others won't, of course, and many probably won't, but I think it's really worth going for it, because we now have a gender equality strategy, which was just adopted in March this year after many years of calling for one, of thinking it wouldn't happen, because I think the Finnish presidency played a crucial role in really bringing about very progressive, very good council conclusions, which means that the other governments, signed up to them as well. And that was only in December. I was thinking, when I was thinking about it, I thought that was a long time. Oh no, it was only in December. So that's only 9 months ago. And, where are they? How are we going to implement them? What mechanism is on board? How are we going to together monitor the implementation of the strategy? How can we ensure that the principles are also filtering down to national level? And I know that's difficult, the council and member states, but I think this kind of a mechanism is really important. So if you can kind of push your feminist leaders to push for that, I think that would be great. Also then on the issue of, economic empowerment, we have the Purple Pact, as we talked about, and you're also on the Feminist Economics Working Group, but really rolling that out, bringing it really into women's lives, linking it with, political leaders, MEPs from Finland that could actually work on that with you as well, and really creating a critical mass, because it's clear the neoliberal model is not working. And it's working for nobody. And we really need to make change happen. It's not going to happen immediately. We need to set in motion those kind of changes. Then next year also is the 10th anniversary of the Istanbul Convention. So again, we need to bring that high up on the political agenda, working with some of your allies around your side of Europe, so to speak, who may be, finding ways of really getting them to ratify it, because there are some countries there that are still very hesitant about it. And then, as I said, CEDAW, I think CEDAW is a really good opportunity to to do some sort of an intergenerational transmission, so that we can, young women as well, really can take ownership of CEDAW and really, see that it is an effective tool, that it's not just something that's out there, but it actually is something that can change their lives at the end of the day. So there's some of the things that I think would be interesting to see, and we're obviously very willing to support you in doing that as well. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think all of those themes you actually addressed, I think we agree on. I know that FGM issue actually is in Parliament right now, but it's in the form of this kind of society or a citizens initiative. But they are they are discussing it, and it will be probably a strong recommendation to the government to also to make particular legislation. And of course, for instance, Terhi is sitting in the government committee or workshop or working group in general on violence against women, and there's going to be a violence against women's program, actually sort of with a home from the Ministry of Justice, which means that it will be quite sort of legislation sort of focused, which I think is a good thing. Also, we will have a new rapporteur on violence against women. We have a human trafficking rapporteur, but we will have also one on violence in general on women. And this is something that we really have been endorsing, because we felt that the space, even if we have had a marvelous work done from the National Human Trafficking rapporteur, still because there's so many left out because we are not able to have a, which is the problem in many countries, a good trial that actually puts the finger that this was human trafficking, or we have a perpetrator who's guilty of it. So it means that we need to look at it on exploitation and violence against women a little bit larger also, even if both are really, really important, but they will probably a little bit overlap. I think it was extremely interesting also. I think it's lucky that we have an anniversary also next year, because I really was somehow sad that the Beijing, even if we did a lot of work, we didn't get the opportunity to really raise it on the sort of the in the general sort of awareness. So I think it's a good thing, of course, that we can bring this together, and we actually worked really, really hard this year that we would have had on the CSW meeting in New York, that we would have had a double up big Finnish delegation, just to be sort of more present, be there in discussions. And I hope that this will be the case if there's going to be a meeting next year. But we need to show that we are strong together. I know we have had people here on the chat talking about AI, algorithms, and women blind. There are a lot of issues and asking for the floor, but I don't know if we have opportunities to really open the debate again. I think definitely your recommendations to us, we will take them seriously, and we appreciate that you have given your time with us. We hope that people have been. It's a little bit difficult to have a really big discussion in a webinar, and we long for having a situation again where we can have really people present and really sort of have a dialogue. But that is not yet really the case. We will wish you all the best, and thank you so much. It has been lovely to see you, and we are actually working with Terhi here together because we don't want to be alone all the time. So we are even, you know, in the same, sharing in the same room. I don't know. There's nothing. This was really a very, very nice 2 hours, and I enjoyed it a lot. A lot of important messages for us to continue. Would you like to say something still, Terhi? And thank you.
Thank you so much, our excellent speakers. Lovely to see you. Thank you for the participants, and thank you for the National Council of Women office, who all worked hard in order to organize all this. It's been really a pleasure. I wish you well in the future as well.
And hope to see you soon.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much too. And just perhaps very quickly to say, we haven't forgotten the digital aspects in our work as well. We are actually working on the Digital Services Act. There is a consultation in place at European level. We have also consulted the members and submitted. We're also looking at you know, the gender discrimination, and particularly issues around hate and around you know, those issues that are in those systems as well. So it is something that we are working on and that we haven't forgotten about. I just didn't raise it here, but we certainly, it's on our agenda.
And
thank you very much.
We are part of a global pact, which is We Protect, which is looking at all the ways on which the internet and artificial intelligence really is male dominated and not to the benefit of women. And that is a priority for equality now going forward, because it's an area of law that is not well fleshed out, not well thought of at all, as we, you know, the internet was built on a feeling of free enterprise and just complete freedom. And, you know, so that is, and we would love to have a next discussion on that topic. So, because you had lots of questions about it, right?
Thank you. I'm afraid I think we will take you up on that offer, because I think that we want to have a continuum. This is, after all, a fantastic way to catch up with each other and talk about important stuff that we want a real life meeting, but I think we also could have much more occasions where we would be able to connect like this, being in different places of the world. So all the best to you. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. And thank you all in the public. Yeah, thank you.